So I've been playing card games for over 20 years, and in my treks, I've been persuaded to try a bunch of games, both in paper and in the digital format. From the obscure to the well-established, I just haven't played enough hour of these games to really give them a fair ranking or assessment, so we're not even going to go into depth with these. They're not going to be on the list, but I have played all these games. Overpower, MLB Showdown, The Elder Scrolls Legends, Shadowverse, Kaza. Played them all, but not enough to really throw them onto a list. Young Jedi. All right, I want to start with an honorable mention here, and I just want to get this one out of the way because it was really the second card game I ever got into, and probably the first I incessantly burdened my parents to buy me. It was a Star Wars branded game of war, comparing whose card was bigger and killing the smallest one. Naturally, there were ways to beef up your dudes and ways to strategize against the fat boys like Darth Maul or Qui-Gon Jinn. But the game catered to a younger audience, and the simplicity of it meant that I got bored of it real quick. So, sorry mom, sorry dad. TEPPEN. TEPPEN stands as one of the most unique of all games that I've played. Games lasting no more than 5 minutes. This is a game of fireworks, timing, and Exhibit A as to why you should know the entire library of cards if you want to succeed. Simply put, it is a fighting game in card form, and there are no turns. You just play, slam cards into lanes, and hope to God your iPad does not crash or your internet isn't garbage. I played this game for a few months, and while it was tremendously frustrating, I did manage to hit champion rank with a relatively basic deck. It rewards timing, but can get immensely snowbally very quick. The good news is that the games are really short, so your hair-pulling frustration is going to be short-lived. The lightning pace and the absence of a turn order means that there's no time to read the card that just eviscerated your best dude. You are going to have to figure that out later. It does get full marks for unique design, but it isn't really bringing to the table the elements for which I particularly like to play card games. Pokemon. All right, guilty. I played this and I loved it. Given I was about like 14 or 15 when I did, I was gobbled up by the mania of it and hunted down cards whenever I could. I will say this though, I did actually play the game and wasn't simply collecting the shinies. Pokemon actually had some pretty sweet strategic elements to it that lent themselves from the same concepts that you'd use when playing the video game. Build a team that can be strongest against opponents in your area. Basically, build a deck to shred the meta. Now, water beats fire, fire beats grass, etc. Building a strong team, creating a cohesive team, swapping fighters in and out while managing their energy went a long way beyond just comparing attack to a HP value. It was a fun game to play in the early stages, and throw in a little element of RNG when it came down to actually determining the 6 random prizes that you'd have plucked from your deck, and you had yourself a damn good time. Now granted, I haven't played this game in ages. I did pick it up for a few hours recently and tried it online, only to realize that holy hell, power creep hit this game like a first edition Charizard. But when I played it in the first few sets, back when I was a teenager, it was layered enough to not be boring, but simple enough to hammer out in about 15 minutes or so. Hearthstone. Magic might be the elder statesman of CCGs as we know them today, but Hearthstone was the big fish when it all began in the digital realm back in 2014. It's seen a plethora of expansions, adventure modes, mini-games, and now an auto-battler that keeps the game relevant. Frankly, Hearthstone is still the top dog in many ways, but it is as responsible for many of my fond CCG memories as it is for my high blood pressure. If this was around the time that Old Gods came out as an expansion, I'd probably put this game in the top 3 no problem. However, an overarching mantra of RNG or cards that discover cards that discover cards and decks that simply look to outvalue and, grind some high rolls has robbed the game of what I loved back when it came out. I'm not saying that this design path is bad, merely that it isn't what I appreciate card games for. Reading your opponent's hand and anticipating their plays is tossed out the window as seemingly every faction is generating random tools to manufacture a turn from scratch. It's hard to play strategically when you have no clue what class, let alone what card, your opponent is holding. The game is fundamentally sound, but I feel it has shed much of its competitive appeal, given how a lot of the successful decks rely on high rolling value or smashing your opponent to 0 before they can pull a rabbit out of their hat. RUNETERRA. RUNETERRA is a great game and draws from some really well established and fleshed out source material. Now, building around a pair of factions, the game comes down to a creature-centric face smasher that doesn't necessarily break any new ground. The new territory that it does tread into, a system of upgradable champions for instance, is something I really enjoy. It gives the game an overarching menace to kind of expect to face and helps remove the veil of what kind of strategy your opponent is running. There's always room for surprises and creativity, however. The alternating attack and initiative phases is a nice touch to the game as well, adding timing as an extra line of play to consider. Though RUNETERRA doesn't really break the mold, it does offer an immensely clean, vibrant, engaging, and quite diverse experience. Control or Swarm, combo or mid-range, the game really supports a multitude of play styles, and it presents itself in a very appealing way. I just suck at this game so damn bad. BattleTech. One of Richard Garfield's lesser-known designs, BattleTech was a game that utilized your deck as your life total. Attack the deck, take damage, you discard cards, and then you lose or win the game in that sense. The main weapon to get this done was the mechs that acted kind of like creatures in a game of Magic. The fun part was that they had speed ratings and can be set up to defend your deck or just patrol on attack. There were the equivalent of spells to change the course of battle or catch your opponent flat-footed, and plenty of mechs and pilots to make the deck more suited to your style. I like to play a deck that didn't really give a damn about defense or defenders. It just fired ranged missiles over their heads, and you roll some dice and hope for the best. It made for some hilarious outcomes, but when this game was played seriously, the elements of strategy were quite prevalent. Now, what I liked about this game was how it took from Magic's color mana system to pay for your cards, but modified it to be less punishing. If you didn't have the right color of mana that you needed to pay for something, it wasn't a problem. You just kind of pay a tax or pay a little bit more to put the card on the board anyways. Now, if you didn't have enough of your mana available, you could put a card face down and kind of pay for it over time. But that card then was in like a construction zone, and it was then therefore available and vulnerable to be attacked. It solved the issue of mana screw, but it did kind of, create an issue of attacking resources as well. Your resources had health total, which was in itself an issue, but it did solve the whole draw and pass kind of turns that would really mire and slow down some games. Ultimately, it seemed to lack the room to breathe and create unique and interesting cards, given that most mechs were really the equivalent of like vanilla creatures. They did have enough stat lines to create variety. They had attack, speed, armor, durability, range metrics, etc. But it lacked design depth and wasn't something I really dove into too far. MYTHGARD. Upon my first glance, you can pretty much get the gist of what MYTHGARD is. Creatures, spells, life total, mana pool. It is pretty much the standard procedure that most card games adhere to when creating their game. What MYTHGARD does so well, however, is that they take some of the best elements from existing games and refine them into a really wonderful mixture that seems to gel really well. It is Hearthstone in the terms of like attacking mechanics, however the lanes that your creatures occupy will matter. The deck building is restricted only by your own ambition, as you can mix and match color identities to find a slew of interesting combinations. There's a very fun 2v2 mode that opens up a ton of synergistic potential and creates very swingy games, and a mana system that solves the mana screw, mana flood issue, but not without its own set of limitations and potential setbacks. MYTHGARD cleans up a lot of what other games have firmly nested roots in, be it RNG or a mana system, and adds layers of skill and complexity that you may not detect in your first few games. MYTHGARD may be one of the absolute best card games out there in the digital format, but damn it, I wish they would print more cards. It has been eons since new content has been released, and beyond, occasional balance tweaks and such, I found myself thinking less and less about it. It is so structurally sound, yet it just needs a little bit of wind in its sails. GWENT. No other game on this list has more of my blood, sweat, and tears than GWENT. Of all the digital genres, it feels the most unique, challenging more than just your mana pool, but rather your deck building skills, resource management, and hand reading abilities. I have no interest in the Witcher lore from which it draws inspiration for the cards. I've read like the first book of the series and wasn't really lured into reading any further, but I do find the cards do tend to really lend unique identities to the factions in which they reside. Again, I know very little of the source material, but from playing thousands of hours of the game, I can get the hint as to what they bring to the table. Now, it's no secret I have a professional relationship with the game, and I'm trying not to let that influence my personal rankings here. Fact is, the game is challenging and satisfying to win. Now, with minimal random elements, a small deck size, and multiple draw and mulligan phases, games can play out reliably, if not predictably, and that is where the problem can sometimes lie. When you can conceivably and fairly reliably have access to the vast majority of your deck in every single game, games can sometimes seem telegraphed early on. That may rob the game of some surprising plays or sequences, but it rewards the player for anticipating correctly and managing their resources accordingly. I love this game immensely and have been critical of it in the past. I don't always agree with the design avenues the game may take, but overall, I feel like the game stands out as a truly unique experience that strays away from the standard life total win condition design space. Magic the Gathering. I wrestled with this one a lot given my time with the game is kind of fragmented over the years, having played a little bit in the early 2000s with my friend's collection, then again revisiting it from Kaladesh onward. The most polarizing of the games on my list is MTG, based solely on the hot and cold feelings I get with it from set to set. It is most played, most recognized, and most vast of any entry on this list, and that kind of history has its periods of ups and downs. This being a purely subjective look into these card games, I can only tell you about my own experiences, and I have both adored and have been massively turned off by this game. I blame the meta, sure, but there have been sets that have come out that have really brought me a ton of joy, such as Ixalan and Dominaria. But there have been some spans of the game that have repelled me from dipping my toe into Standard again. The reason I have this game at number 3 is because of the incredible amount of ways to play it. Now, Limited is where I find the most joy and the challenge of piecing together a game plan from the scraps available, and that's really the appealing experience for me. Now, beyond that, discovering Commander and the countless avenues to take wherein all games feel very different and exciting makes Magic a game I can find joy in from one approach or another. And yes, there are standard metas that are not complete slogs to wade through as well. They do exist. Lord of the Rings TCG. Decipher hit a home run with Lord of the Rings TCG and created a game that escapes the life total framework that many card games seem to exist in. This is a game that I mourn to this day as it really offered an incredible experience that went beyond the standard 1v1 rule set. It really allowed 3 or more players to all compete and try to win the game all in a simultaneous way. What I really loved most about this game was that it was about a journey from Hobbiton to Mordor as you protect Frodo from the forces of Sauron. You assemble a fellowship and cross through the perilous terrain, equipping your heroes with items and spells, while dodging and defeating the various orcs and ringwraiths and other nonsense thrown at you by your opponents. The brave would be rewarded or ambushed with a massive amount of deadly force. All the while, you gambled on the strength of your troop and the resilience of your ring bearer. Having played countless hours of this game with my closest friends, we would laugh, we would conceive mischievous plots against one another, bluffing our way through Moria and Lothlorien. The experience was massively rewarding, and the skirmishes demanded intense plotting and thought to really squeak out alive. Again, as long as Frodo lived, you were still in the game. I don't know how many times I fed Pippin or Merry to a cave troll, but if it got me out of the mines of Moria, it didn't matter. Unfortunately, the game's glory days succumbed to the loss of licensing once again and some power creep issues. Boy, suddenly Frodo wasn't the only boy who can carry the One Ring, and some random schmuck from Gondor was just as trustworthy. Yeah, I don't think so. Star Wars CCG. Oh, how I miss this beautiful complex game. Your first love is often the one you will never let go of in some way. And I can attest to that because I have saved a bunch of these cards, I've sold a bunch of these cards, and I've felt massive regret and have since been reacquiring them. I can't confirm this, but I do remember reading in an issue of Scry magazine way back in the day in like 2001, where they ranked like the most popular card games at the time in terms of complexity. Star Wars CCG was at the top of that list, outranking games like Magic and such, having a plethora of rules and a rulebook that really came with like a really intimidating fat glossary that explained every unique scenario and every little interaction, and boy, were there a crap ton of them. When it comes to capturing the source material and giving the players a sense of reenacting the notable scenes from the movies, Star Wars CCG really delivered. The characters were more than just stat lines, really, and truly influenced the game state in ways that reflected on the card persona that they represented. From Darth Vader force choking people to Han Solo letting you use a little bit of smuggler's luck to change the odds, the game was really packed with lore-heavy cards that enriched the gameplay experience. Decks were built in thematic fashion, whether your objective was to blow up the Death Star or to hunt down the remaining Jedi and extinguish them from the galaxy. The card library offered an expansive variety of options and let players create competitive decks or really design a pair of decks that created a cinematic feel that really built tension. You could literally play a deck where you train Luke to be a Jedi while your opponent looks to cross him to the dark side. It was really damn cool. Ultimately, though, once Decipher learned that they were losing their license to the brand, they kind of throttled up the power creep and released a last wave of cards that ultimately made the previous set seem pretty punchless. And when the game was good, man, was it really good. But that last set kind of just really took a lot of the fire out of it. To this day, the game still releases updated virtual sets as are designed and curated by the Star Wars CCG Players Committee. You could actually play this game online on a platform called GEMP. So there they are, all the card games I've ever played in my life, and the top 10 that I have invested the most amount of time with. Now again, this is all subjective, there's no right or wrong answers, but I know what you're saying. No, you're totally wrong about XYZ. How many of these card games have you played? How many have you thought, probably should be better up on the list, further down? Again, this is all just for me. And again, when I'm ranking card games, it's all about fun. What do I have the most fun playing? And judging by my experience. So let me know in the comments over here. Tweet at me if there are card games that you think I should play. Make it happen. Let me know. And if you've got Star Wars cards that you want to get rid of, hook me up. Let me know. Contact me. I want all of them. All right, friends. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button. Follow. All that jazz. My name's Flake. Adios. Be kind. Goodbye.